Tired of paying for his daughter's whims, the rich man rented her a shack in the wilderness. But when she saw who she would have to live with, she froze in shock. "Alexandra, you are leaving today. I'm tired of putting up with your antics," Frederick Adamson told his daughter. "Enough with the stress you've been causing me and Adriana." "And where will you send me?" Alexandra snapped. "Maybe back to that cursed London of yours? Or somewhere even further away? Of course, that's easier for you. Out of sight, out of mind. Why do you hate me, Dad?" "No, I'm done with your overseas escapades. It'll be easier to control you here. You're going to the village. There's forest and a border for 100 miles around. It's not far from the capital, it's a protected area, but there's no internet or any other distractions," the businessman explained seriously to his daughter. "It's the perfect place for people like you. Problematic children? Is this your idea or Adriana's?" Alexandra asked. "She's probably just thrilled with such a decision. What do you care about Adriana?" Her father exclaimed angrily. "It's silly to hate someone just because they became your stepmother. Of course. You replaced Mom with your mistress so quickly, and no one seems to care," Alexandra smirked. "It's fine. Keep doing it. Why even need a child from that tiresome old wife? After all, your new one can have as many as you want. Alexandra, as much as I love you, your childhood is over. Enough. We're tired of your antics. You're an adult woman now, and you'll take full responsibility. No more money, help, or glamorous parties," sighed Frederick Adamson. "And as bitter as it is to admit, you've become the biggest failure of my life." Alexandra ran out of her father's office, slamming the heavy door behind her. The last 6 months of her life had been one continuous nightmare. Before that, there had been long months of her mother's illness. Dad sent Alexandra abroad. He couldn't stand the tears. He was a businessman to the core. Her wife, in hospice care, no longer recognized anyone. She rarely came to her senses, and when she did, it was only for a moment. Meanwhile, her daughter wept by her bedside. But studying abroad didn't work out. Alexandra got involved with the wrong crowd. A couple of times, the police detained her in shady places. Her father barely brought her to her senses just before her mother's funeral, and then sent her to a rehabilitation center for a few months. It helped, but Alexandra barely remembered her mother's funeral. Once sober, she truly regretted the lost time. But there was nothing to be done about it. During this time, Alexandra was expelled from the fashion and design college her father had arranged for her. It became a major embarrassment. Frederick Adamson presented his daughter's enrollment in a foreign institution as a great achievement to his colleagues and partners, but her disgraceful failure also became public knowledge. Her father was furious, shouting at her so loud the walls shook. "You're a disgrace to this family. Your mother would have died of shame if she knew about all of this. Don't you dare mention her name." The daughter cried. "What else am I supposed to talk about? My only child turned her life into hell. She's been to every filthy den. By some miracle, she avoided shameful diseases. Alexandra, I just don't want to know or understand anything anymore. You were given a chance in life that other people can only dream of. But could you have squandered it any worse?" Frederick said bitterly. "I'm deeply disappointed." After the rehab center, another completely unexpected piece of news awaited her. Her father had gotten married. His new wife, Adriana, a tall blonde with a spiteful demeanor, acted as if Alexandra didn't exist. She was very shrewd and resourceful. From what Alexandra heard, Adriana had been married before her father. She embodied the typical predator image. Bold, cunning, beautiful, and incredibly cold. In desperation and seeking revenge on her father, Alexandra snapped again. She threw wild parties and squandered money. A few times, she made it into the news during police detentions and even received several administrative fines. Her father acted gradually. First, he took away the keys to the car, which she often drove while intoxicated. Then, he blocked all her cards. And now, she was being exiled to some remote place with no internet. The last straw was when she set her stepmother's wardrobe on fire. Alexandra didn't even understand what was happening to her. It was as if some invisible demon was pushing her into all these reckless acts. So the idea of stuffing her stepmother's furs and dresses into the wardrobe and setting it on fire seemed like a brilliant one at the time. It ended with the automatic fire suppression system kicking in. Wet, Alexandra was pulled out of the room by her father's people. And now, she was facing this exile. Alexandra thought her father would personally take her to the village, but he just called a taxi and gave the address. She rushed to him from the car. Daddy, for Mom's sake, forgive me, but cancel everything. It's in her memory that I'm still dealing with you, her father replied. But every patience has its limits. Mine is exhausted. And if you don't want to live properly, then I don't care anymore. Damn you, and damn Adriana too. Alexandra shouted. Her father waved his hand. The taxi sped up, the driver ignoring her screams. 3 hours later, Alexandra was already getting bored. There was only forest around them. They finally entered the village, or rather, it was more of a settlement with a temple, a club, a police station, shops, a school, and a clinic. There were some quite decent houses, but the taxi dropped her off at the very outskirts. There, only dilapidated shacks stood. The driver stopped in front of one of them and let her out with her 2 suitcases. Alexandra found herself at the edge of a very unremarkable house. It was more of a hut, almost in the forest. The old wooden house hadn't been painted in a long time. It had faded, lost its color, exposing its wooden frame. The roof under the tiles was slightly crooked. The fence resembled the teeth of an old man. Wooden stakes stuck out everywhere. Alexandra pushed open the gate and took a step. A little white dog with one black ear immediately rolled out, barking loudly. Alexandra screamed, jumped back, and cursed. Then, following the dog, a strange woman appeared on the porch in a long, multicolored sarafan made of mismatched patches. Her gray hair was braided into a braid. "Are you Alexandra?" The housekeeper asked. "Come in. This half is yours. It's paid for a year. I'll show you where the firewood is and how to heat the stove." "And what's your name?" Alexandra asked. "I'm Natalie," the housekeeper answered. "Be prepared for people to think I'm strange. You'll hear some gossip. Don't worry about food. Frederick Adamson and I have made arrangements. You help around the house, I cook and feed you. Everything's fair. And for that, thanks." "Daddy's generosity," Alexandra muttered. "Well, show me your mansion. I'm curious what's in it." Inside, the house was much more spacious than it appeared from the outside. Their halves were separated by a wall, but there was a shared corridor with a toilet and shower, quite modern. However, the water for the heater had to be hauled manually from the well. There used to be a bathhouse, but what would I do heating it by myself? Natalie said sadly. "Last winter, it collapsed. I had to dismantle the wood." "How did it collapse?" Alexandra asked. "Did it just fall by itself?" "No, of course, it was under the snow. A lot of snow piled up. Then it melted, and that was it. Luckily, no one got buried." "You live alone, right?" Alexandra smirked. "Or maybe not. I have animals. Good people throw them out. They don't want them anymore. They get them, play with them, and then abandon them. I take them in. I've brought in cats from the forest, starving, and dogs. For example, Oliver, the one who met you, was tied up in the thicket. They got him, played with him, and threw him away. Yes, my good boy." Natalie petted the dog that ran up. "They are my family. They will never betray me. Simple, pure souls. I also have a horse here. Another one they threw out. I bought her from the meat factory. We haul wood from the forest together. Her name is Bridget. A horse? A real one? Will you show her? Alexandra asked, wide-eyed with excitement. I'll show her, of course, nothing to hide. Put your things down first, Natalie advised. Now let's light the fireplace. It's not a quick job, or you'll have to sleep in the cold. That evening, Alexandra habitually charged her phone, which turned out to be useless here. Even the messengers didn't work. Her messages to friends remained unsent. Alexandra changed into her pajamas, clearly too thin for a village house. Then she put on warm socks and crawled under a large patchwork blanket. She lay in the dark, remembering her childhood. She and her mom always found something to do. Scarlett was a rare woman, beautiful, stately, and yet a craftswoman and dreamer. In her hands, books and toys came to life, and from the simplest scraps, fashionable dresses for her daughter's dolls would suddenly appear. Her husband just laughed about it. He loved Scarlett as much as he was capable of and indulged her whims. Thanks to her, Alexandra learned to swim and wasn't afraid of losing at competitions. Because of her, she was the first to ride a horse, and above all, her mother loved her unconditionally. She could always come to her with childhood fears, insecurities, and grievances and receive a warm embrace or a kind word. Alexandra didn't even notice when she started crying from the memories. How had she managed to forget her mother's warmth, her scent, and her gentle, fragile beauty? Her father's new wife couldn't even hold a candle to her mother. And yet, her father had chosen her for some reason. And so quickly, as if he had just replaced one woman with another model. How could anyone do that to people? The next day, sadness turned into anger. Alexandra fumed over why her father had sent her to this hole. She decided to question Natalie, but saw her walking under the window, talking to a colorful pack of cats. The woman was passionately telling them something, as though she was listening to their responses. Alexandra thought that her first impression had been correct. Natalie was just crazy, and her father had probably met her by accident. In her fashionable clothes, Alexandra stepped onto the porch and realized she wouldn't be going any further. The night rain had turned the ground into a muddy mess. Out of nowhere, Natalie appeared nearby, holding a bundle of clothes and rubber boots. Here, take these, you won't be able to walk in your clothes here, Natalie handed her the items. Don't worry, everything's clean. Thanks, Alexandra muttered and went to change. A three-colored, one-eyed cat ran past her into the house. She turned around and asked, "Is it allowed for her to come in?" "I don't think anyone minds," Natalie laughed. "If you're okay with it, you can take Kitty in. But be warned, she likes to crawl under the blankets. Once you let her, she'll keep asking." The thought of sleeping with a large, warm cat unexpectedly warmed Alexandra's heart. She gently touched the fluffy back, and Natalie said, "When you're done changing, come eat. Then you can go to the store, buy yourself some coffee, sugar, cookies, whatever else you need. You're young, I don't even remember what the youth likes these days." Alexandra had lunch with her hostess, took the money she was given and her backpack, and went to the store. Kitty stayed on her half of the house, sleeping. For some reason, the thought of this warmed Alexandra's soul. She didn't even consider running away, though she had enough money for a taxi. At the store, she was greeted by a lonely, bored saleswoman. She studied Alexandra for a while before asking, "Who do you belong to? Did you come to visit relatives?" "I live with Natalie," Alexandra explained. "Right by the forest." Yeah, I know," the saleswoman said, looking puzzled. "How did she let you in? Did she rent out the other half of the house?" "Yes," Alexandra shrugged. "What's the big deal?" "Maybe she needs the money." "No, you just don't know. Her son lived in that half with his wife and kids. They crashed their car 2 years ago. They fell off a cliff. They never found their bodies. It happened while they were on vacation on a mountain road. They all died. And when Natalie found out, she went crazy. She kept waiting for them to return alive, since no bodies were found. She didn't put up a monument at the cemetery. Now she only communicates with animals. Poor thing, what can you say? Oh, wow. Alexandra said, stunned. I didn't know. Thanks for telling me. Griselda's my name, the saleswoman corrected her apron and introduced herself. So, what can I get for you, Natalie's tenant? What does your soul crave? My name's Alexandra, the girl smiled. What would you recommend? Everything on the shelves here looks unfamiliar, in bulk. I only remember seeing stuff like this at my grandpa's village. Well, this is a village, Griselda replied. We sell what people buy. Natalie filled the backpack and grabbed a bag of groceries. Then Alexandra realized she wasn't sure if Natalie even had a fridge. But it turned out she did. And there was a bowl of milk waiting for Kitty on Alexandra's side of the house. In the evening, they had scrambled eggs with sausage that Alexandra had bought at the store. Natalie asked, Did Griselda already gossip about me? How did you know it was her? Alexandra asked, surprised. I didn't even mention her name. There are only 2 saleswomen. One works on even days, the other on odd days, the hostess smiled. Don't worry about it. It's nothing. You cried and talked half the night behind the wall. When you know something's wrong, but can't share it with anyone. I can't even make myself cry. It's been 2 years, I feel like a stone. They sat in silence, drinking tea. Alexandra had already come to terms with the quirks of her landlady and even found her to be a pleasant woman. Natalie didn't pry into her personal life and behaved very restrained. They lived like this for a month. Alexandra's father hadn't called, but she suspected he had contacted Natalie to check on his wayward daughter. The girl didn't believe her father could just erase her from his heart like that. Over the month, she and Kitty had become inseparable. The cat now followed her everywhere and even started catching the mice that had become abundant in the fall. Alexandra learned something new about the landlady. One early morning, strange people started banging on their door. They were calling for Natalie, shouting, Help, Natalie, the girl is going to die. Natalie's not here, she's probably gone to the forest, Alexandra peeked out from her half of the house. You can shout there, I guess. Who's lost me now? A cheerful voice came from the porch. Alexandra, I've picked mushrooms. We'll have fried mushrooms with potatoes today. Natalie, screamed the woman pounding on the wall, April's giving birth, and the paramedic got stuck somewhere on the road, no idea when he'll be here. Please help, for Christ's sake. Aha, see, I told you the girl was pregnant. No one believed me, Natalie muttered. She's gained weight, she's growing up. So what now? Your daughter's going to be a grandma at 38. Just help, things are bad there. April's screaming, she's beside herself, the woman wailed. You took the Hippocratic Oath, Natalie. Oh, when was that? Fine, let's go, I'll grab my bag. Tell your people to boil some water, Natalie ordered seriously. They left, and Alexandra was left holding the basket of mushrooms. She was surprised. Natalie didn't seem like a doctor at all. More like a hermit or a herbalist. A couple of hours later, Natalie returned, exhausted but pleased. She announced from the doorstep, We've got a boy. They took April to the hospital. Everything's fine. So, you're a doctor? Alexandra looked at her in surprise. I worked in a maternity hospital for 25 years, Natalie confirmed. A top-level doctor. My son convinced me to stop. I started fixing up this house, my grandfather's. He promised to fix everything. I laid the plumbing, installed the shower. I worked off my time and left. Let me cook the mushrooms with potatoes. You seem really tired, Alexandra said. My mom taught me, I'll try to remember. What did your father send you here for, Alexandra? Natalie suddenly asked. You seem like a good girl. I have nothing to share with you, Alexandra clenched her teeth stubbornly. And I'll never forgive my stepmother and father. My mom wasn't even cold in the grave, and that bitch already crawled into Dad's bed, and now she's living happily. I think that's wrong. From that day on, Alexandra noticed more and more often that Natalie was missing. The woman had started going into the forest frequently, even though October was approaching. There were almost no mushrooms left. And Natalie took bags of food with her. She said it was for her appetite, but it didn't sound very sincere. Is she feeding bears out there or something? Alexandra asked Kitty. But the cat only weakly purred. All right, dear, here's the plan. You're in charge, and I'm going into the forest to check on Natalie. I have to keep an eye on her. Something's not right. As she prepared to go into the forest, Alexandra realized she had picked up the strange habit of talking to animals from her landlady. Perhaps it was the atmosphere in the house that made one feel like they were losing their mind. She found Natalie easily, just following her tracks. In the wet earth, they were clearly visible. The worn path ended near a tilted shed, maybe a guardhouse. Alexandra peeked inside through the slightly open door and saw a young man, a little older than herself, lying on a dirty mattress. He had sweat beading on his forehead. Natalie was fussing nearby, trying to feed the stranger with a spoon. When the young man saw Alexandra through the open door, he flinched. Fear flashed in his eyes, and Natalie turned around and gestured for her guest to come in. Inside, Alexandra was able to get a better look at the man. He was wearing strange clothes, something resembling a prisoner's robe, with a tag on the pocket indicating his squad and last name. Natalie shot her an angry look. What are you doing here instead of sitting at home? You've been running into the forest so often, I got curious, Alexandra replied. If I'm interested, others will be too. You should have brought him to our house and stopped sneaking around the forest. He won't make it. He's injured. Lost a lot of blood, and he's got a fever. He's a bit better today, though. He was unconscious all week. When he's better, we'll move him. You're going to kill him faster here. We'll take a horse early in the morning, cover him with a blanket, and bring him in a cart, Alexandra suggested. He'll recover faster at home. The walls help. Are you going to rat us out? Natalie asked, hope in her voice. He's a good guy, even though he's a fugitive. He didn't just run away for no reason. And he looks like my son. His name was Marcus too. Why would I rat anyone out? Alexandra was surprised. What would I get out of it? A medal or a badge? The next morning, they put their plan into action. They moved Marcus from the guardhouse into Alexandra's side of the house. In case anything happened, the local policeman shouldn't come to her part of the house. There were 3 rooms in total. They set Marcus up in the furthest one, where Natalie could finally tend to his wounds. Marcus took a shower, changed into the hostess's son's pants and hoodie, and finally decided to explain himself. Thanks for not abandoning me, he said awkwardly. But it doesn't really help much. I got arrested for something I didn't do, and now, if they find me, I'll get even more time. So why were you in prison? Alexandra asked. You might as well tell me now, since you've started. Well, it's all pretty standard. After the army, I started working as an armored car guard at a bank. Everything was fine for a year, and then bam, after one money transport, some money went missing, and, as luck would have it, I bought a car with my savings the day before, plus my friend had repaid his debt. Long story short, they didn't find anyone else. So I became the scapegoat. No one said anything directly, but it was obvious they were going to pin the theft on me. But what's worse is that the investigation uncovered other embezzlements. So, I ended up going to trial as part of a group. That's a whole other story. And you never found out what really happened? Alexandra asked, holding her breath. Well, how should I put it? A year later, the bank went bankrupt. The missing money was never really investigated. And then, through my lawyer, my former employer, the owner of the bank, asked to meet with me. By then, he'd started drinking heavily, but he came to me in his right mind. Mr. Albertson asked for my forgiveness. He said his wife and her partner had cooked up the whole scheme, and they framed me because I was the most gullible. So why didn't he say this in court? That would have worked in your favor. Alexandra reasonably suggested. Think about it. By then, he was already a washed-up, drunk old man, and Adriana always walked around like the queen, above all suspicion. Nobody would have listened to us. So, during the trial, I found out that Christopher Albertson had taken his own life. He drowned himself in a river. His body was found a week later. By then, Adriana was already with another fool, even older than her. I heard his wife had cancer, was in hospice. Wait, you said Adriana Albertson? Alexandra gasped. So, that's the wife my father picked. Is she your stepmother? Natalie asked, guessing. Oh, you know what? Stay here and don't stick your nose out. Even if your father stops paying, just stay. No need to throw your head on the chopping block, you're still young. That night, Alexandra cried her heart out again. But now, she felt very sorry for her father, who had fallen into the hands of a calculating, manipulative woman. She realized that her father had simply become a pawn in Adriana's game, and most likely, he was headed for the same disgraceful end. While she cried, Marcus came in, unable to sleep either. He sat on the edge of the bed, took her hand, and held it tightly. Why did you run away? Alexandra suddenly asked. Were you tired of it, or was it a mistake? I couldn't take it anymore. They sent me to a colony, kind of like a settlement, not too strict. But the warden kept tightening things up, and recently he announced that we'd be working round the clock, sleeping in the workshops in the industrial zone. Anyone who disagreed would be sent to a more restrictive prison. And you decided to escape? Alexandra clarified. And now, if they catch you, your sentence will be worse. Yeah, that's right. But I had an argument with the warden. And then, outside the zone, when I was heading back to the dorms, I had to walk freely, without a convoy, because we could leave the settlement for work. He shot at me, tried to finish me off, but I managed to escape, got lost in the forest. Luckily, Natalie found me. Well, you're lucky. It's surprising that you ended up here. They lived peacefully for about a week. Marcus kept trying to help around the house, but Natalie forbade him from leaving the room at all. He reluctantly followed the rules. Then, one morning, a motorcycle roared outside the gate. Soon, someone started banging on the door to Natalie's side of the house. Coming. What's going on? Leonard, is that you with your rusty old motorcycle? Natalie smiled and yelled a bit louder. Alexandra, come here. We have guests. The local officer's here. I'll introduce you. Alexandra walked into Natalie's side of the house and saw a tall, dark-haired guy, looking about her age or maybe a bit older. When he saw her, he immediately smiled. Ah, I heard you got yourself a tenant. I didn't have time to see what kind of wonder it was, said the policeman, introducing himself as Leonard. This isn't a zoo to be walking around looking at people, Natalie muttered. What are you doing here so early? Tell me, Natalie, have you seen any strange tracks or people in the forest? Leonard began questioning. A fugitive could be roaming around here. You should be more careful, especially living without a man. Oh, please. Natalie smirked. I have a weapon and a permit. And besides, there's been no one I would have noticed. Yeah, I've heard you've been walking to the forest like it's your job. I thought you'd seen something, but they say you haven't been out there for a week. Oh, I threw my back out. That's why I haven't gone. We barely managed to get firewood, Alexandra and I. We went out in the cart, but Travis, our neighbor, cut it for us. I couldn't do it myself. And my tenant's probably not trained for that. Yeah, that's obvious, Leonard confirmed. You can tell she's a city girl, pretty too. We don't get many of those around here. By the way, there's a dance at the club tonight. Want to join? I guarantee, with such company, no one will bother you. I'm not really in the mood for fun, Alexandra said, but seeing Natalie's face, she added, although, it might be good to get out for a bit. Just tell me what to wear, I don't want to look too flashy. With your looks, you could wear a sack and still turn heads, Leonard grinned. I'll pick you up at 8 tonight. They saw their guest off. Then they checked on Marcus. He was hiding with the cat on the stove under the blanket. They started getting Alexandra ready for the village ball. She didn't dress up too much. Just chose jeans, a top, and a shirt, put on sneakers, and tied her hair up in a high ponytail. That evening, Leonard came to pick her up on foot, without his motorcycle. Together, they made their way to the club, where there was not only a disco for the 4 nearby villages, but also a karaoke contest. A local band was playing live. The villagers were singing terribly, some off-key, others out of tune. Then, Alexandra unexpectedly decided to try her hand. She sang a song in English. The band quickly adjusted and played well along with her. Leonard, puffing with pride for his girlfriend, filmed everything on his smartphone. Alexandra received a standing ovation and won the contest. Leonard spent the rest of the night accepting congratulations on her behalf. But Alexandra kept thinking about Marcus. How was he? What was he doing? Had he fed Kitty? But Leonard didn't notice her inner turmoil. He chatted nonstop about his acquaintances in the capital and how Alexandra truly had a singing talent. She didn't argue, just nodded silently. Leonard kept going on about Natalie. She's really an unhappy woman, a bit of a saint, you could say. Completely lost her mind after losing her loved ones, he mused. Marcus, her son, was my classmate. Natalie was always cheerful and hardworking, even though she raised him on her own. We had a great time at his wedding. They had 2 kids, and then such a ridiculous end. Now, Natalie's a completely different person. Just a shell. She wanders around talking to cats. That's a sign of mental illness, Leonard laughed. You need to get married. That'll clear your head. Alexandra puffed up in indignation. She didn't think Natalie was crazy, more like a little eccentric and quirky. When they got home, she chatted with Marcus for a bit, told him about her triumph at the disco, and then went to bed. The next day, Alexandra finally decided to call her father. She didn't want him to become Adriana's next victim. Frederick Adamson, for some reason, wasn't happy to hear from her. He asked indifferently, "What, calling to beg for money? There's nothing for you." "No, Dad, what are you talking about?" "I'm fine," Alexandra answered unexpectedly, "but just be careful, okay? I found out Adriana is a black widow. All her men end badly." "Interesting. And who told you that?" Frederick chuckled. "Don't worry, I highly doubt I'll meet the same fate as poor Christopher. And honestly, stop constantly attacking Adriana. We're married, get used to it. And if you keep badmouthing her, I'll block your number and stop paying for your phone. You'll be stuck there in the middle of nowhere without a phone. That's not fair. How can you do this?" Alexandra yelled. But all she heard was the dial tone. Her father didn't want to listen anymore. Meanwhile, Marcus was slowly recovering. He was increasingly eager to help around the house, risking revealing himself. And, as luck would have it, Leonard began visiting more frequently. He was very interested in Alexandra. He also understood that she came from a wealthy family and saw potential prospects for himself in her. The more often and boldly Leonard showed up, the harder it became for Alexandra to stay calm. Her nerves were also frayed by the oddities Leonard pointed out. And it was during one of these moments that he caught them off guard. Alexandra and Natalie were returning from the store when they ran into Leonard. What a coincidence. "Who's keeping the stove burning and rattling dishes in your house?" the officer asked, pulling out his service weapon. "Now, quietly. Follow me," and we opened the door calmly, without any shouting. Otherwise, I'll shoot your guest like a hare." They walked to the house. Natalie opened the door and called, "Marcus, come out. Your running's over." "All right, I made some cabbage soup," the fugitive replied. "Eat it, think of me. And thanks for everything. No hard feelings. Write to me, son," Natalie requested. "And when you're free, come back. You told me you didn't have parents, you were in an orphanage. Consider me your mother now." Marcus wiped his tears with his hand and hugged the woman. Then he followed the officer. Leonard puffed up with self-satisfaction, anticipating a reward or maybe even a promotion. At first, Leonard thought about accusing Alexandra and Natalie of hiding a criminal. But he realized that the women might end up on trial themselves. So, they struck a deal with Marcus. The report stated that he had been hiding in the shed, and the landlady didn't know anything about him. But it didn't help much. News of the sensational arrest reached the media. Several TV crews arrived in the village, filming the house where the criminal had been caught. Both Alexandra and Natalie were caught on camera. However, Leonard, who had dreamed of the limelight, soon sent the reporters away. But it didn't really save the situation. Even Griselda at the store felt the need to speak out. "Oh, well, Natalie's the kind of person who feels sorry for everyone, but I didn't expect this from you. Who else are you going to drag out of the forest? You've gone and taken in a fugitive, and we have kids running around here, by the way. And what if he's innocent?" "What then, Griselda?" "Innocent people don't sit in prison," Griselda said gravely. "And if they gave him a sentence, then he's a criminal, no doubt about it. I once felt sorry for a guy like that. Then I got a taste of the trouble. Learned my lesson for life." Alexandra was walking home when her phone suddenly rang. She picked it up, and her father's voice came through the line. But the reason for his call wasn't cheerful. "How do you manage to embarrass me even while sitting in the middle of nowhere?" Frederick shouted. "Is this some kind of talent?" "Dad, we just helped a good person." "He told the truth about your Adriana," Alexandra tried to justify herself. "You know what, Alexandra?" Frederick shouted even louder. "This has crossed all the boundaries. If there's dirt somewhere, you're always the one to get covered in it. That's it, forget it, from now on I have no daughter. You won't get any support from me anymore." Alexandra stood there, staring at the phone, listening to the dial tone, thinking about how this was all Adriana's influence. Her father couldn't be this cruel. She decided to call him later, give him some time to cool off. But for now, she was heading to Natalie's, because that was the only home she had left. That evening, Leonard stopped by, but they didn't even let him through the door. When he tried to explain himself, Alexandra refused to listen. She was absolutely certain she was going to wait for Marcus to be released from prison, no matter how much time they added to his sentence. Alexandra realized that she had fallen in love with the poor armored car guard whom her stepmother had framed. Meanwhile, in the village, tempers were boiling, and Frederick found himself in the center of his own personal nightmare. The thing was, his new wife had been quietly feeding him pills to raise his blood pressure. She was planning to cause him a stroke, and she succeeded. After his conversation with Alexandra, Frederick began feeling unwell due to the stress. He collapsed and lost consciousness. Adriana simply stepped over him and rushed to a restaurant to meet her friends. It wasn't until late in the evening that the housekeeper found him. He was taken to the hospital, and after being resuscitated, it became clear that Frederick couldn't speak or write. Adriana, along with her accomplices, spread rumors that her husband had been feeling ill for a long time and had given her power of attorney to manage his affairs. It was a forgery, but so expertly done that it passed as a legitimate document everywhere. To achieve this, Adriana had even gotten close to her husband's lawyer, who personally certified the document with his signature. After taking Frederick from the clinic, Adriana arrived at his office. "Your husband can no longer manage anything. He's a vegetable. With this power of attorney, I'm in charge of everything now. And if anyone disagrees, they can quit, Adriana declared, smiling sweetly. "Can we see the medical documents?" asked the chief accountant. "Of course," Adriana replied with a sugary smile. And even Frederick Adamson, drooling. "Just come visit us anytime." Of course, she had no intention of providing proper care for her husband. She left him to the house staff, who even secretly bought the prescribed medications for him with their own money, out of gratitude for years of good treatment. But Adriana was hoping her husband would quickly die, and yet he kept living. In the end, it didn't matter. All of Frederick Adamson's assets were now in Adriana's hands, much more than the money she had received from the banker. The only thing left was to send the frail former owner to a nursing home. Naturally, it would be a paid facility, but the conditions were barely better than a prison, and the death rate among the residents was horrifying. Adriana sent her husband there, to certain death. Meanwhile, Alexandra saw a news segment about Frederick Adamson stepping down from business due to illness. She was at the store, where Griselda, as usual, was watching TV shows and news. There was no television at Natalie's house. Alexandra turned pale upon hearing the news. She forgot why she had come to the store and immediately called her father. But it was Adriana who answered. "Is it not enough for you? You drove your father to a stroke, and now you have the nerve to call here? Forget this number." Adriana shouted into the phone. "But I want to visit him, talk to him. Your father is not accepting anyone. And forget about the inheritance. It's all mine now. Almost broke the game, didn't I? Little calculating brat. Thankfully, your poor father has already been punished by life for me." Alexandra hung up. It was clear that Adriana wasn't going to give her anything. The girl sighed and made her way to Natalie's, who she had come to think of as a godmother of sorts. After hearing her out, Natalie said, "It's a shame about Frederick, but there's nothing to be done. Stay with me and live. No one will bother you here. I've spent years building this blessed image for myself, after all." "So you're not crazy?" Alexandra smiled. "I always suspected that. You've always been so rational in your thinking. And your love for animals is more of a sweet eccentricity than a sign of madness. Oh, you know, people cope with grief in their own ways. In my case, it turned out like this. People constantly fussed, offering their sympathy. I had to pretend I didn't realize my son was dead. Over time, everyone left me alone on that. And then I could finally mourn my loved ones. I understand. I miss my mom so much," Alexandra confessed. "But I don't even remember the day of her funeral. Everything is just a blur. You know, Marcus, our armored car guard, really reminded me of my son. Honestly, I'm going to wait for him. And we'll see what happens. If you two hit it off, you'll get married. If not, you'll be my daughter. You don't have to leave. Stay as long as you need. We'll figure out how to make ends meet. I have some inheritance left from my son. He was in business, like your father. He saved up quite a bit of money. He always wanted to renovate this house." Alexandra hugged Natalie. They sat quietly in the kitchen for a long time. Life in the village, however, was bustling with activity. Leonard was a determined man, persistent, and unwilling to let Alexandra slip away to someone else. So he decided to earn her forgiveness. The rumors that she was the daughter of the businessman shown on the news were spread by the ever-talkative Griselda. Leonard, who had learned about Alexandra's less-than-perfect behavior from his police channels, wasn't deterred. Of course, the officer couldn't understand why the heir to a vast fortune was playing the role of a near pauper. But he decided to pursue his own game. Last year, wealthy people from the capital had stayed in their forest, and after drinking heavily, they caused quite a mess. Naturally, they covered it up, but Leonard had kept some compromising material. He decided to use it to make himself Alexandra's prince. He knew that one of the vacationers was a famous music producer. Leonard sent him a video of Alexandra singing. A couple of hours later, the officer received a call. "Who's the singer you've got?" Does she have any education? Can she read music? A voice asked. Not bad, she's got a good range. Bring her in, I'll listen to her at the studio. But the main thing is, no funny business. This girl is my fiancée, Leonard set the condition. Otherwise, I remember what you're capable of. Come on, relax, kid, don't worry. It's all in the past, the producer smirked. Now, bring her over. Leonard went to Natalie to persuade Alexandra to go to the audition. But she was stubborn. She didn't want to see the officer. It was only Natalie's intervention that saved him from complete failure. She told Alexandra, "Listen, you really do have a beautiful voice, and you've been to music school. Just give it a try. Do something your mom could be proud of, even if it's just in heaven." "All right, I'll go," Alexandra replied, "but what if it doesn't work out?" "You have a home where you're always welcome," Natalie smiled. "Don't be afraid." Alexandra went with Leonard to the Capitol for the audition. On the way, he joked and tried to act like a great guy, but he didn't succeed and only irritated his companion. He took her to the producer, Walter Cantwell. He listened to Alexandra sing, grimaced, and said to Leonard, "I'll take her, but we're even. I don't see much talent here. And without some help through the bedroom, your protégé won't be of much interest to anyone." "Got it," Leonard replied. "You can start promoting her." So, Alexandra found herself back in the Capitol. She was settled into an apartment with several other singers. They were all contracted for a season at the cabaret. On the weekends, which coincided with her weekdays off, she went to visit Natalie, bringing city treats, and together they read the letters Marcus had been faithfully sending. He had been given more time, but an investigation had been initiated against the head of the previous colony, the one responsible for Marcus's escape. Leonard, who increasingly came to the cabaret to listen to Alexandra, still didn't win her favor. One evening, after drinking heavily, he went to her dressing room and caused a scene. "You're only here because of me," Leonard yelled. "And not even a thank you." "Well, thank you," Alexandra lazily replied. "What exactly did you expect? Do you even realize you're talentless? Walter owes me something, so he took you in. Otherwise, no one would have bothered. There's a sea of talentless singers out there. So that's how you really feel, huh?" Alexandra was outraged. "Fine, benefactor. You can also deal with ending my contract. You can take care of that right now." She left the cabaret and went straight to Natalie, taking only her purse. The next day, she received a call. A different production company wanted to talk to her. They weren't offering a performance in front of a drunken crowd, but a chance to record an album. After thinking it over, Alexandra agreed. Long studio sessions began. It took 6 months before her song started getting airplay on the radio. Then a music video was filmed, which unexpectedly became a chart-topping hit. During this time, Alexandra's apartment was paid for, and she was provided with good living conditions. She didn't forget about Natalie, of course. She visited her during her free time, and Natalie even bought a TV so she could watch the music video of her adopted daughter. The music video was even shown at the nursing home where Frederick Adamson lived. Despite the conditions, the man was still alive, defying his last wife. Adriana was furious about this, as well as the fact that she had to continue paying for the nursing home. Frederick, meanwhile, was quietly working on his right hand and learning to speak again. He asked a kind nurse to find his daughter and send her a message on social media. The nurse came through. Alexandra rushed to her father the very next day. She presented her documents proving their relationship and then spoke with the head doctor. The doctor, seeing the famous singer, asked for an autograph and, of course, couldn't refuse her request. Alexandra left the nursing home with her father, who was crying tears of joy. She worked even harder. She sent her father to Natalie's in the village to continue his recovery. After all, Natalie had medical training. For Adriana, the medical staff continued to repeat the lie that Frederick Adamson was in the nursing home. No one thought to check its validity. Producers recognized Alexandra's incredible work ethic. She eagerly studied vocal techniques, started writing her own lyrics, and easily got along with musicians and other colleagues. Alexandra filmed several more music videos, including duets. By the end of the year, she was receiving awards as the best emerging solo vocalist and continued working to provide a better life for her father and Natalie. At a free concert in honor of a small town's anniversary, a little boy made his way onto the stage during her performance. He looked so funny that Alexandra felt sorry for him. The boy introduced himself as Joseph and said he also dreamed of becoming a singer but currently lived in an orphanage. "What about your parents? What happened to them?" Alexandra asked. "Are they even alive?" "No one knows," Joseph replied. "I'm an orphan, they left me at the orphanage. They never found my mom." "And what do you sing?" Alexandra asked, trying not to cry. "Can you perform something?" Joseph surprisingly sang with a pure voice. And Alexandra realized that the boy had real talent. She personally took him to the orphanage that day, spoke with the caretaker, and asked her not to scold him. Then she came back again, once, then twice. She brought Natalie and her father, who were both happy to meet her ward. Soon, Joseph went home. Using the right leverage, Alexandra was able to adopt him. Of course, her producer used this for a PR campaign, and now, at the end of each concert, Joseph would come on stage with his adoptive mother. They would perform a duet, and the crowd would erupt in applause. The producer covered Joseph's lessons with teachers, and during the rest of the time, Alexandra's adopted son lived with her father and Natalie. He was only taken to the capital and nearby cities for performances. They didn't want rumors to spread that the singer was depriving her adopted son of his childhood. Unexpectedly, the appearance of a grandson prompted Frederick to step up his rehabilitation, and soon he was walking without a cane. One day, Alexandra caught her father and Joseph playing football in the yard. Watching their match, like a referee, was Kitty, the cat, from the window. Having regained the will to live and his drive for success, Frederick unexpectedly decided to return to business. He re-established old connections, found investors, and built a holiday resort in the village, one that attracted many tourists. The locals were excited. Frederick was more than happy to hire them. He didn't cheat on salaries and was a just man. The change in Frederick's health took Adriana by surprise. When she came to the office, she was informed that her access card was no longer valid. Moreover, her husband's lawyers were already waiting for her with divorce papers and accusations of fraud. The fake power of attorney was in their possession. Adriana suffered a crushing defeat. While the investigation was ongoing, Frederick divorced her. They arranged a confrontation, during which the woman, seething with hatred, revealed more than she intended. "I did everything to make you die, and yet you're still alive, you bastard. It was all going so perfectly. The scandal with your daughter, my pills, everything worked wonders. You almost died. And then, suddenly, you pretended to be incapacitated? I was a paralyzed old fool, trying to be saved by only my daughter," Frederick smirked. "That's why the food tasted so strange. Are you admitting to attempted murder?" The investigator asked during the confrontation. "Strange, our clients usually aren't so talkative." "I don't care. If this is the fame I'll get, so be it. I'll become an authoritative woman," Adriana laughed. "So what? I drove one husband to his death, he drowned, almost killed the second one in a nursing home. By the way, we'll exhume Christopher Albertson and see if he drowned on his own." With your affinity for pharmaceuticals, Adriana, the investigator smirked. "The smartest one, huh? Probably already imagining your new shoulder boards?" Adriana asked him. "Well, go ahead, write it down, I'll tell you everything. By the way, Adriana, why did you frame that armored car guard, Marcus?" Frederick asked. He just happened to be in the wrong place. He's a dumb fool. And he bought a car right before, bragged about it in front of everyone. It would have been a sin not to take advantage of that, Adriana chuckled. That was enough for Frederick's lawyers to start pushing for a review of the case against the wrongly accused armored car guard. Partly, Frederick did it for his daughter, who loved and waited for the boy. But there was also Natalie. She had won Frederick's heart. However, the legal formalities still took some time. About 6 months later, when the investigation was over, Frederick told Alexandra, "Go, meet Marcus. He's being released today, and we'll prepare a welcome here with Natalie. Let the boy come straight home. He's suffered enough, thanks to my ex-wife." "Yeah, Dad, you sure picked the right woman to marry," Alexandra smirked. "All right, I'll go. I can't believe I'm going to see him today." Since, legally, both Alexandra and Natalie were not related to Marcus, they weren't allowed long visits. They had to make do with short meetings during this time. Marcus walked out of the prison gates in a daze. The warden himself was almost escorting him, and outside, Alexandra was waiting, tears streaming down her face. They hugged. Marcus couldn't believe his luck. And at home, he met Joseph, whom he had known from letters and photos. He also met the man responsible for his early release, Alexandra's father. At the festive table, an announcement was made. "I proposed to Natalie," Frederick declared. She accepted. "We'll be having a wedding soon. By the way, kids, if you're planning anything, we can combine the event." "I don't even have a ring, and asking for your daughter's hand," Marcus mumbled. "Here you go, son, we ordered it," Natalie replied, pulling out a beautiful box. "Well, then I asked for your hand," Marcus looked at Alexandra with loving eyes. "Of course, being with a simple guy might be boring, but it's reliable. And I'll gladly adopt Joseph." "I agree," Alexandra laughed. "It's the first proposal I've had, I'm nervous. By the way, with my dowry, I could marry anyone. Dad's planning to leave half of his fortune to Joseph. Well, I only have one grandson for now, the oldest, and he'll run the business with Grandpa. Whether he'll sing for the soul or become a footballer, the road is open for you, Joseph." Alexandra looked at her father, so happy, and understood that it wasn't the pills that had healed him, but love. Natalie's care, who had tended to the half-paralyzed man for many months, had paid off. Frederick Adamson, who had become bitter after years in business, softened, learned to appreciate the simple joys of life, and the appearance of Joseph gave his life new meaning. A month later, 2 noisy weddings were held in the village. Proud Joseph carried the rings on velvet pillows. The brides, as expected, wore white. Natalie had never been married before. The identity of her son's father was unknown. Because of this, she was especially emotional and kept breaking down in tears. Alexandra hugged her, also teary-eyed, and comforted her. "Why are you crying all day? You've scared all the dogs and cats already, Natalie, stop it." "It's out of happiness," her new stepmother cried. "And there's still the church ceremony ahead, Alexandra. I'll probably cry the whole church full." "The priest will handle it. He'll know how to calm you down," Alexandra smiled. "But for now, let's go. The people are waiting for us." At this wedding, there was one guest who didn't seem to enjoy anything, Leonard, who avoided making eye contact with Alexandra and Marcus. But even his sorrows came to an end. Alexandra seated one of her friends, a singer, next to the officer. She quickly recognized Leonard as a bachelor with prospects, and by the end of the wedding, they were chatting happily and even managed to dance a few dances. Adriana was eventually convicted of fraud and attempted murder of her husband. The death of Christopher Albertson, her first husband, could never be recognized as foul play. Too much time had passed. Adriana celebrated, but not for long. Other participants in the large scam began to take their revenge. Soon, she regretted making the fake power of attorney. Her years of wealth and prosperity came to an end. Alexandra continued to build her career as a singer, and her husband didn't stand in her way. Besides, his wife would soon have to leave the stage, as they were expecting a child. The ultrasound revealed it was a girl, which Joseph was very happy about. The boy had discovered a talent for football, and now his grandfather was building a sports school for him and the other children in the village. Meanwhile, Alexandra's adopted son had briefly forgotten about singing. Frederick Adamson transferred the management of the hotel to his son-in-law. Of course, he was learning the basics of business under his father-in-law's guidance, but he was already doing quite well. Natalie simply enjoyed her role as mother and grandmother.